Hey, Internet. How you doing? Good. Yes, I can hear you. Something's been on my mind. Back when the Charger Hellcat ignition episode went up. Awesome episode. I think one of the best ones we've done in the past 6 months, if not a year. That was a high point for me, that episode. But something's bothering me about it. And it has to do with what we did on the standing mile. The standing mile run itself was awesome. But I couldn't help but notice in the comments, people were freeze framing it when the data showed 60 miles an hour, doing the math based off the YouTube time code, and going, what the hell? This isn't hitting 60 in what you guys claim. A couple tenths of a second off. What gives? And I started gnawing on this idea because we spent a lot of time talking about acceleration numbers, and we seem to have inflated the importance of them quite a bit. So I want to talk about that a little bit. First off, some background. I've done car testing for Motor Trend for 6 years, let's say. I've done acceleration testing, braking, handling. I'm proud to say that I've ran some of the fastest cars Motor Trend has ever tested. McLaren P1, the 9-second Alpha GTR. I mean, awesome. I'm no stranger to speed. I've set a land world speed record in a hybrid, but a land world speed record nonetheless. So I have some pretty good background doing acceleration runs. So it was interesting when everybody's harping on this minor discrepancy. Why does discrepancy exist? Well, let's explain that. For acceleration runs, we apply weather correction and rollout. Why do we do this? It's because what Motor Trend has always done. Motor Trend has been testing cars long before, since I was alive, right? So there's this wide, amazing database of numbers that Motor Trend's collected, and all those test numbers have been gathered the same way, with weather correction and rollout. Now sure, the weather correction's changed over the years, and we do update very occasionally, or not occasionally, not frequently, we update rarely when it does happen, but weather correction's based off a SAE formula. Rollout is what you get at a drag strip. So it's this weird combination of things, because we don't launch on a prepped surface, we launch on a street surface, but we use rollout, which is a drag racing thing. We will apply a weather correction. Now why do we do all this anyway? It's not to make the numbers artificially better, right? It's to make the numbers comparable with one another. Back when actually the first episode that we filmed for Ignition, even though it was the second episode to air, was the Camaro ZL1. We were out in Arizona, and it was freezing, 40 degrees. And the thing was not hooking up, and it wasn't getting the air it needed. It wasn't working out, the acceleration numbers. The 60 times were like in the high 4-second range, 5.0 range or something. Which is why we apply weather correction, because weather correction brought that number down to a realistic result that you'd get in California near sea level. Because when we got the ZL1 in California near sea level and tested it here, the results are roughly the same. When you test cars at different altitudes, in different weather conditions, regardless of your temp, your humidity, your barometric pressure, those are the three variables we plug in, all those numbers are going to have an effect on a gasoline-powered engine, because the air coming in it's so dependent on the air coming into that engine, and if it's hot, the engine's not going to work well. If there's not enough air going to the engine, it's not going to make as much power as advertised. So to eliminate that variability, and that's what you do in tests, you eliminate variabilities so the numbers can be consistent across all testing areas. That's why we apply correction and rollout, to make all those numbers consistent. That means, consequently, as a byproduct, numbers tend to look better than what's realistically possible. When we publish a acceleration run on a manual all-wheel drive performance car, I cringe every time. We're looking for the best acceleration, and in that car that means some really abusive drivetrain clutch treatment. But we always have to think, what is the best acceleration? When you start putting in variables like, oh, we're going to, drive this as a normal person would. What's normal person? There is no normal person. Somebody could drive it completely different than the next person. And when you start introducing variabilities into these testing protocols, that's when the data gets screwy. We tried at a point to adapt a roll-on acceleration where in automatics you would be rolling at 10 miles an hour and you'd accelerate to 75 or so, and we'd capture that window of acceleration. And that was a pretty good number, I thought, because it simulated what would happen if you were rolling down the street at 10 miles an hour and just stomped on the throttle. We had a whole trigger set up on the throttle to account for the delay between the throttle application and the throttle actually opening in the car, and it was a really cool test. The problem was what happens if you're in a manual. How do you treat that? And then how do you treat a manual with short gearing versus a manual with long gearing? For example, like say an Evo GSR has a really short ratio transmission. How do you approach that test? You're going at 10 miles an hour, right? You're going to want to downshift. Well, what gear are you going to start in? How long is that downshift going to take? That's going to vary from person to person. Let's say you're in a Corvette. The fastest way to do this test would be to start in first gear, but no one's driving around town in first gear, right? So this variability creates problems for the data. That's why we spend hours and hours and hours looking at this stuff and dealing with this stuff, and that's why we've settled on go for the best acceleration possible, even if it's not realistic, because it's indicative of what cars do, right? That's the testing protocol. Here's the thing. A car's 0 to 60 number is not the sole thing that makes a car valuable, right? We get lost in this stuff. I never want to be the person that says just because a car's X second faster to 60 than another car, that means it's the better car. When we test a car and we get a result, whether it's an acceleration, braking, handling result, there is no positive or negative associated with that result. It's just the result of a test. The quality that you put on that result is up to you, right? If a car's faster to 60 than another car, it's just faster to 60. That doesn't mean the car's inherently better. It means it's faster, right? If you associate better with faster, that's on you, right? We put this in your hands. But why are 0 to 60 numbers so important? That's the thing I question. If I'm looking at car performance, right, and I really want to analyze an acceleration run, if I'm building a drag racing car, I'm looking at quarter mile time and trap speed, because those are the important things for an acceleration run for a drag car, because the goal is to hit the quarter. I'm also going to look at accelerative G's longitudinally to see how those build, how those dissipate as the car increases. Those are the things I'm looking at. In fact, if you want to just compare acceleration numbers to acceleration numbers, the quarter mile result is the more informative result, because it's going to tell you much more about what the car's doing. A car with a high ET but a ridiculously high trap speed. I'm sorry, let's phrase that. A car with a slow ET. Let's say a car that does 13s but hits the trap at 130 miles an hour, right? What does that tell you? That tells me that car has traction problems and a lot of horsepower, because it can't get out of the hole, but once it hooked up, it is moving. I would also look at the acceleration G longitudinally and look at how much, when does that kick in, when is that car able to apply peak acceleration. That informs you a lot more than a 60 number, a 0 to 60 time. If a car has a 10-second, quarter mile time and hits, 130 again, let's say, you can move those two variables around you want, and it's going to tell you something about what happened in those elapsed 10 seconds or 14 seconds or whatever. The 60 number is really easy to get. If you are building a car and your goal is to hit 0 to 60, right, as fast as humanly possible, you want 4 driven wheels, you want the most power you can send to those wheels off the line, and who cares what happens after that. That's why all-wheel drive seems to be getting really popular in the forums, online and stuff, because all-wheel drive cars tend to have better 0 to 60 times because you can launch the hell out of them. But I'll ask you this. What's the worth of a 0 to 60 time? Why does that matter? Why is the 0 to 60 important? I want you to seriously think about that. And if the answer that you have in your mind is, well, being faster is better, I'd ask you, why? Why is being faster better? Now really think about this. Really start digging down into your own head and think about why you have to be faster. All right? I've had the luxury of driving the fastest cars that you can buy. And you get to a point where you realize there's always going to be something faster. Always. When I was a teenager, I loved to just drag race everybody. I had a really crappy Ford pickup, and still I wanted to drag race everybody. And I remember the first time I lost really, really bad, and I was really humbled, and I was like, oh, I got to build something faster. Now I look at that and go, why? What's the point? And it really gets into this concept of attaching your ego to the driving experience. Feeling like you have to be faster to be better than other people. That's a really dangerous slope. And it may not be true for you, but if it is, I really want you to think about this stuff. And think about what being faster is that's so important to you. We're going to get kind of philosophical now, but bear with me, please. When I drive a car, I do it for very selfish reasons. I want a car that's fun. I want a car that just feels good. I would never buy a car just because it was faster than another car. If it happened to be faster, cool. If it's slower, whatever. One of my favorite cars in the world is the Miata. Miata gets so much crap for looking the way it looks and being as slow as it is. But I tell you, it's one of the most fun cars on the road that you can buy. If you want the best driving car you can get for under $30,000, the car that puts the biggest smile on your face, Miata, hands down. Right? But with that, you really have to be comfortable with yourself in order to be in that kind of car and be okay with that. But be okay with not being the fastest person on the road, because what does being the fastest person on the road give you besides an inflated sense of self-worth, right? If you have to rely on the car's acceleration being better than somebody else to feed your ego, you got some problems that you should really look into. We should really check into. Because, you shouldn't have to think like that. You shouldn't have to be confrontational with other cars on the road. Sure, you know what? Admittedly, it feels good to be faster than the person next to you and sort of like, haha, I got you. But think about the duration of that experience. We're talking 0 to 60, and cars, a modern performance car is going to do 60 in under 4 seconds today. You're telling me that entire experience, those 4 seconds, are worth any potential downsides the car might give you? Really think about that. The duration of that feeling that you get, let's say 4 seconds for the passing a guy or, out drag racing a guy, and then, let's say a minute of afterglow just to be generous. Is that worth it? Is that really worth it? Is that really what you need to get a car for? Back in the Sport Compact Car glory days, Dave Coleman wrote this editorial, and I still remember it very, very keenly. And he was kind of on the same bend about 0 to 60 times. And maybe that's why I'm talking about it a lot. But he actually calculated the speed in gears for a mixture of modern performance cars and economy cars, and found out that most of these cars hit 60 right at the top of second gear, right before you shift to third. What does that tell you? That's not a fluke. That tells me that, and he explained this, it tells you that automakers know the 0 to 60 time is important to an audience for whatever reason, and they've geared the cars accordingly to get the best 60 time. Isn't that interesting? The Corvette, last gen ZR1 or last gen Z06 would do 60 in first gear. You had to really rev it out, but you could do it. Now why? So you can get that 60 time. Why are dogleg gearboxes gone and not back? Dogleg gearboxes is when you have reverse where one would normally be, first where second would normally be. Now think about actually using this. How often are you in first gear in a manual? Just pretty much when you're leaving a stop. You're primarily set 2-3. If you're on autocross, you're 2. If you're on a road course, most road courses, you're 2, 3, 4, occasionally 5, right? Think about that actual gear shifting, right? That would be great, because 3-2 is, it's easy, but it'd be easier just to bang it forward, right? Well, guess what? A 1-2 in that configuration would be really hard getting a 60 time. Maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't have it. I don't know, just a theory. I guess in summary, I really want people out there to think about why 0 to 60 is important. Because to me, it's just a byproduct of a quarter-mile run. And, it's funny to point and look and say, whoa, that's really fast. And it is really fast. And that's interesting in itself. But that shouldn't be the end-all, be-all of a car's performance. Nor should its quarter-mile time, braking time, lateral G, whatever. That's not the end-all, be-all of a car. The reason we test cars isn't to dictate a result. It's to inform a decision. It's interesting to figure out why these cars work the way they do. And what we always try to, or what I always try to get back to, if a car is fun, and I can drive a car and say, this is really fun, I'm always trying to find a way to link the fun to the data. And that's what we're trying to do in Best Driver's Car and all that stuff, is what makes a car fun? What aggregate sum of all these various pieces is the thing that leads to fun? That's why we look at this data, and we try to extrapolate in some ways or another. Maybe it's this specific tire brand has a slip angle that's really enjoyable. Maybe I don't know, there's tons of reasons you can get into about why, and you could look at the stuff we've done with Best Driver's Car and try to analyze why some cars are fun and some cars are not. And some fun cars don't make great numbers, and some not fun cars produce very good numbers. And that always ignites the debate on the forums, because people look at the numbers and say, like, well, this number is better than that number, this car must be better. It's like, well, take it from the people that actually drive these things, and drive a lot of these things. Just because a car produces a great number doesn't make it inherently better. I think you should try to separate quality from the number and just say the number is the number. That's what it is, and that's interesting by itself, but that doesn't determine, the vehicle's quality. I've said that a lot, but that's really how I feel. Another interesting thing is 0 to 60 times for production cars are sort of reaching a bottleneck. Every car that we've tested in the past, every really fast car that we've tested is ending up with a 0 to 60 time around 2.4 to 2.6 seconds. That's interesting, isn't it? That they're just sort of ending up there and nobody's really edged beyond that. There's a couple theories, and I think the thing is just tires. Production car tires, tires that you would drive on the street, not racing tires, but normal tires just can't supply more than a certain amount of grip, more than a certain amount of longitudinal acceleration, something just over a G. And when you're just over G, we're talking about forces that I kind of understand in concept, but I'm not a physicist or an engineer, or I would be a physicist or whatever, or an engineer. But as roughly as I understand it, that sort of G level sort of ends up with 0 to 60 time at that bottleneck. It's interesting. It's interesting, but it's not, again, it's not the end-all be-all of cars. So when I'm doing an acceleration test, I'm noting, the time, of course. But I'm also trying to note mentally, what's the quality of that acceleration? How hard is it? How much fun is it? One of the last Gen Z06, I really enjoyed doing acceleration runs because those Michelin Pilot Sport Cups, you could really drive that tire out of the hole. It was really fun modulating the grip in those tires. That was really fun. Of course, that doesn't come by in a number. That comes by in a review, and word counts being what they are and video being what it is. You can't give that kind of nuance all the time, even when you want to, because there are other pressing things that you want to incorporate, which is unfortunate. Cars are the most complex consumer good you could possibly buy, and it's really tough to give them a fair share, or give them a fair shake. Anyway, in sum up, ask yourself why acceleration matters to you, and really dig down and keep asking yourself why. Follow that train of thought, see where it ends up. Make it uncomfortable, and that's good. That's good. Try to find out if it's just because you want to be fast, and that means something to you. And if that means something to you, really, I have no problem with that. But I want you to ask yourself why that means something to you, why that is what it is. And if that's preventing you from having fun, really consider that. Really think about that. And realize that you don't have to be the fastest guy on the road. There will always be someone faster, no matter what, at all. Of course, this doesn't apply to anybody who does drag racing seriously, because that's what drag racing is all about. But a lot of the cars we test aren't drag racers, and I mean, if you're doing, when you start getting, to really fast drag racing stuff, that's when this stuff really starts mattering. But that's when it becomes a little bit more interesting. For most production cars, though, it doesn't matter. Frankly. So yeah, bit of a ramble, but hope you guys enjoyed. Always, please send me questions, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. Take care.